Joseph Gary Fenderbosch.
Have you always lived in Gallipolis?
I have not. I was born in Medina, Ohio, 1948, and my dad moved down here, or we moved here when the Kiger Creek Power Plant opened.
Now, let's turn a little bit to the aspect of you turning 18. Are you enlisting or being drafted for Vietnam? Is that the case?
Yes,
Did
I
you
was.
enlist or were you drafted?
I was going to be drafted, but I enlisted, and I had attended Ohio State, and had not done well academically. I had attended Gallia County schools until I was in the 8th grade. And then I went away to St. John Vianney Seminary in Steubenville, Ohio for my high school days, and spent a total of 5 years at the seminary. And then I went after that to Ohio State. And after my first year at Ohio State, I went and got my draft notice, and I went to the recruiter and thought I wanted to be a pilot, helicopter pilot. So I had taken the Army extension courses and everything to do with flight and helicopters and fixed wing and everything else. And so I took those tests, and then I went for my physical, and I got a color deficiency. I have a color deficiency, not color blind, but I can't, or I couldn't at the time, read every pseudochromatic plate or number that was there for the eye test. I passed everything else, so you had to have perfect color in order to be a pilot. Then I attempted to get into language school to be an interpreter, because I had had a number of languages while in school, and they had no schools open at the time. And if I had known better, I would have probably stayed and said, okay, I'll go in the minute a school's open. And so anyway, I went into helicopter mechanics. I thought, well, the next best thing to get to fly would be to be a helicopter mechanic. So I went in November of 1968, went to basic training, and then I went to AIT at Fort Eustis, Virginia, and became a Cobra crew chief, the attack helicopter, AH-1G. And as soon as that was completed, the schooling, I went to Vietnam in May of 1969. And
this is at the turning point, the crucial year of 1968, and it's the height of anti-war protests, and you're being shipped to Vietnam. So where did they send you first?
I went to Chu Lai, which is just a bit south of Da Nang, and it's in I Corps. So the country, I believe, was divided into 4 different areas, and Saigon perhaps being the 4 Corps, and then 2 Corps, and then we were all the way up at the northern part of South Vietnam. So I spent my first 7 months doing guard duty, doing certainly mechanical work on not only AH-1G helicopters, but Hueys, and anything it was that we could keep all those helicopters flying in our unit. We were in the Americal Division, 23rd Infantry Division, and we were also in the 123rd Aviation Battalion, and our unit was F Troop 8th Cav. And when I first heard that unit I was going to, I kept thinking of the TV show F Troop, yeah. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, I'm assigned to you know, a bunch of goofballs here.
Gary Storch would be your sergeant? Yeah, just,
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when I got there, I found out just the opposite, that our unit was a very, very strack unit. And we had a unique situation that most of our commanders that we had were West Point graduates. And at the time, when they came out of, if I remember this correctly, if they came out of the War College, and I think at the time it might have been in Hawaii, then they would come to our unit or other units, but I remember specifically ours, and they would get their 6 months of command time, and as part of their career. So we had a new commander every 6 months. And after about the 7th month of doing the typical working on helicopters and guard duty and in the monsoons and everything else, I had an opportunity to become a crew chief on the Huey. And again, our unit was a kind of a search and destroy unit. We would go out in teams of 2 Cobra gunships, 1 observation helicopter, the Loach, and then also a recovery ship, which was the Huey. And you would have 2 pilots, 2 crew members, and usually 2 infantry guys from our unit. We had 80 to 100 infantry attached to our unit. So we would go out and fly every day these different boxes, coordinates. And if we found anything in those coordinates, we would call back and have the infantry come out. We bring out 2 or 3 shiploads of our infantry, our blues, as they were called, and we would insert them. And they would search a village or search an area that we thought there was suspected activity. And so we did that on a daily basis, and every day that you could fly, you did, except for when your helicopter was in for maintenance. So you didn't have too many days off, and flew long days.
Now, when you repair the helicopters, you get them back in what kind of condition? They came from the front? And,
well, they could be in various stages. We lost a lot of helicopters in our unit from being shot down. I myself had been shot down a couple of times and had been very fortunate as to be able to, the pilots were, I remember the first time we were coming in on final to pick up our blues that we had inserted earlier. And we took fire, and we were right in the middle of a river out in the mountains. And the shots hit the tail rotor on the rear of the helicopter, and we just spun around and splashed right in the river. And then another time we had an engine that got shot and caught on fire, and the pilots auto-rotated down and landed. So I consider myself very fortunate. We lost a total of, in the time that I was there, we lost 27 guys in my unit, either pilots, crew people, or infantry. And so I ended up being there a total of 3 tours. I kept extending. And when I got my first orders after my first year at Chulai, I went home. Well, before I went home for my leave, they had asked me to extend for 6 months because I had what they call a critical MOS, which is a mechanic, helicopter crew chief kind of thing. I had all the experience and was pretty good at working on helicopters at that time. And when I first got to Vietnam, I was a specialist 4, Spec 4, and then I became a Spec 5, and then I became a Sergeant E5, and I was a platoon sergeant in charge of our lift, part of our lift part, which is the guys that fly every day. So I had duties and things when we weren't flying that we had to do, make sure ships got in for maintenance, got in and parts ordered and things like that. So I kind of did that till I left. And so when I got time to leave Vietnam after my first year, everybody was encouraging me to stay, and of course I really hadn't thought about extending. And then they said, well, you're going to go to Fort Hood, Texas. That's your next duty station. And that is basically the pits of the world. You do not want to go to Fort Hood, Texas. Sand, dust, hot.
After being in Vietnam, that was worse?
They said it was. And as vulnerable as I was at 20 years old or so, I decided that I got talked into that. So I extended for 6 months. And then when I came back after my leave, my company wasn't there. It was gone. And I had to figure out where they were. And they had moved them up to Da Nang, north. And so I hopped on a truck and went up to Da Nang from Chu Lai and reunited with the guys in the company. And they had all the numbers had been marked off the helicopters or taped over, so nobody could see what they were. And I guess not long after I came or went home on leave, they got the orders to move the entire company as secretively as possible to Da Nang. And then after that, I again extended for another 9 months. When we went, President Nixon had the Lam Sam 719, and that was the incursion into Cambodia, Laos, and we were even in North Vietnam. So we went back, and there was an area that we did. We went in and retook a base that was called Cam Duck, and that was overrun in 1968 during the Tet Offensive. And so that was sometime in late 70, I believe. And then we went into Cambodia and Laos and retook Khe Sanh, which was overrun again in 68 during the Tet Offensive. And we flew the Ho Chi Minh Trail every day and went out to the old Marine base at the Rock Pile. And again, during that 27 months that I was there, we lost about one guy a month.
Any friends?
Oh yes, yes. And that's that was probably the second worst regret I think that I have. Number one regret being is that for whatever reasons, and I think I'm still dealing with those today, with PTSD and everything, that I would like to figure out why I would not have come home when I had the opportunity after my first tour and do what I did to my family by, I think, scaring my mom and my dad and my brothers and sisters. And why wouldn't this idiot want to come home? And I'm still dealing with it. I'm still trying to figure out, and I think a lot of it has to do with the folks that I was with were very professional, very hardworking, very dedicated, and I think I like very much being a part of that. And then
I think people don't really understand the bond between military people who've been in theater, and even people will have like a leg blown off, and they'll still want to return to their unit. Absolutely. And be with them.
The 27 people that we lost, again, I knew every one of them, and in that first 7 months, again, I was again being strictly the mechanic, and so when we got done with our shifts and got all our helicopters flying, and we worked through the night if we had to, and almost all the time we had 100%. So I wasn't really, you would see the helicopters in Chu Lai. They used the same pad that we did. The medevac helicopters would come in, and we were right next to Graves registration in July. So they would fly in on our pad and turn over, and they would just be unloading body after body after body, not only of some of our guys, but it was just constant day in. So you're out there working on your helicopters, and you're looking at the hangar, and you kind of look over to your left, and there's another medevac coming in with all the body bags on it, and we knew some of the guys from Graves registration, and we'd occasionally have a beer with them and at our club or something. But their jobs were tremendously difficult and dynamic. So I tried to figure out why I would do that, and I've come to part of the conclusion is that I was somewhat selfish, I guess, because I enjoyed what I was doing, and you get recognition for what you're doing. You get promotions. I went before the E6 board 8 months after I was in country, and the first time I sat down, and the command sergeant major of the division looked at me and said, "What the hell are you doing here? You haven't been in the military but 18 months or something, and now you're going to become an E6, you know." But so I didn't become an E6, but I ended up getting 4th in the division, and I don't know why I didn't get a promotion. Probably I just didn't have enough time. But when I was leaving Vietnam, they wanted me to extend in the service and sign up for another 4 years, and in that period, the command sergeant major of the division turned around and he opened up this safe, and he pulled out $10,000 in cash, American dollars, and said, "This is your re-enlistment bonus, VRB." And I said, "Where did you get that?" Because you're not allowed to have American money. And he says something to the effect that I have my ways. And he said, this is your $10,000 if you sign on the dotted line. And then he said, "I will immediately sign the paperwork to make you an E6, and then I will guarantee you in 2 years you will be an E7. And of course I said, "Now how can you do that, Sergeant Major? You can't do that. You can't promise me." And he goes something to the effect, "Do you see this? One of the highest ranks in the Army, you know, Division Command Sergeant Major." And he said, "I can make it happen." And he said, "You'll have to go back and be an instructor or whatever at Fort Hood, Texas." And then the other time I extended, they told me I was going to go to Fort McClellan, Alabama, which was the home of the WACs. And they told me, "Oh, you don't want to do that. That's you know, stateside, strict, spit and polish, and all that." So I kept that extending, and again, I'm still trying to figure out all the camaraderie we have. A reunion the last 13 years, and the last one was in Dayton here in April, and we had our sergeant major has been attending a number of these, and he got cancer last year. And so when I saw him at this year's reunion, he said, "Well, it's back. I've got to start chemo again when I get back home." And he said, "I didn't want to do it right now." And so we were there Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I had breakfast with him Sunday morning before I came back to Gallipolis. And we got an email Thursday morning, and he had died in his sleep. But he was so happy to be there with everybody that he did everything he could possibly do. He didn't let us know how bad he was. And things like that, even today, have profound impacts on us. And we've had parts of our unit, we had an Arlington ceremony last year from a couple pilots that they had recovered that they couldn't find. And so we had about 13 guys go to Arlington, and that was there wasn't a dry eye there, because everybody, at least at that period, I knew both the pilots. It was a Cobra gunship, And actually, one of our pilots ended up pointing out they had been searching for 2 years in the wrong area. And the Vietnam search team said they got a hold of him, and he went literally to the map and he said that's where they crashed, right there. And they were 2 clicks away for 2 years going through, you know, trying to find. And literally, the minute they got on the site, they found it. And so they recovered both the bodies, or, you know, whatever was left at that time, and enough to they buried them together in the same grave in Arlington. And then we've had tragedies with our guys, their children, and suicides and deaths in their children, and things like that. That we're there as a group still, that will be able to go there, and some of us will be there for the funeral and the family to represent F Troop 8th Cav, Blue Ghost. So that is important. That camaraderie, as you mentioned earlier, is probably the driving force. Once you're in combat, and like I said, the first 7 months I'm sitting in the hangar and doing maintenance, and all the guys are flying in and flying out, and you hear all their war stories, and this is what we did today, and da 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 da, and so you kind of get wrapped up in that as a young person.
There's a certain adrenaline to it.
Oh, there's a large degree of adrenaline to that. And the first time I went out as a door gunner, like a trainee, we had inserted a number of ARVN troops, South Vietnamese troops, and we would let them sweep this village. And they would come back every time with chickens and pigs and everything they could loot from the village to come back, and they would try to put all that stuff on the helicopters. And that didn't work out too well because, you know, when it gets really hot, helicopters don't function well with weight and heat and all that. So you had to tell them, no, you can't have your chickens and your pigs and all that stuff. And that was my first experience. But when we took off from that village, my first flight, we started taking fire. And I kind of froze there for a second on the machine gun because I'd really never, I went, you know, I heard that, and then I heard the firing on the other side, and then I just started opening up. But I hesitated because I'm thinking, okay, now what is that, you know? And, but when you had said what kind of shape were those helicopters in, I have just numerous pictures of helicopters that had crashed, and some that had, one of our Cobra pilots, distinguished Flying Cross recipient, he got shot in a transmission, and he ended up landing on a dirt road or something after he auto-rotated down, and they recovered the helicopter, but I had a picture of the transmission that came back in the hangar, and I took it big 51 caliber hole right in the side of the transmission. And so last year I heard him talking. We were in Atlanta at the reunion, and there's a space, there's a place there about a mile from the Atlanta Speedway where they redo Vietnam helicopters. Freedom Works or something, I can't remember the name of it, but they actually do Cobras, Loaches, and Hueys, and they sell them to you know, help pay for the operation. But we went over there and got a tour, and we got to put one of our F Troop 8th Cav banners up, and so it was really neat. We had about 50 or 60 guys and wives there, and that was one of our larger reunions. But we're all getting older, so, you know, we're not able to have the expense of traveling, and then also or the health to do it. But those guys were interesting. So
let me ask you about you're returning home. Did you experience any animosity from the anti-war movement?
absolutely. When we every time I extended, I got a leave, and I remember flying back into Seattle after my first year, and at the SeaTac airport, Seattle Tacoma, and we got out, and there were protesters everywhere, and people were spitting and calling us baby killers, and I'm just kind of, I'm not upset or anything. I just, I think everybody had their right to protest and do everything else. But if they didn't have the appropriate information and what you were doing, and I think even at our time and our age, it was really hard to determine. I don't know that war is appropriate at any time, but given that you're in that situation, and there is a thing about wanting to survive and being part of it. So my thought about doing anything in life was that if you're prepared, and I was a Cub Scout, and so from early on, you know that it's important to be prepared, and so that's what I did, and so I did different things that I think other crew chiefs and other people wouldn't do, and from the amount of ammunition that I carried on my helicopter to sea rations I carried in case we got shot down. I carried extra malaria drugs. You had to take two different types when you were there, a Vivax and a falciparum strain of malaria. One was a daily pill that you took if you're in the field. And even though we were kind of flying over the field, we landed a lot and everything and around guys. So I took both, and the big orange pill, which was the weekly pill. And most everybody wouldn't take that pill, and because it gave them diarrhea. So a lot of people were getting malaria. So they started. We'd have a company formation, and you'd see a Jeep approach, and you would get a guy, medic, passing out bottles to take urine samples. Make sure, because it was a court-martialable offense if you didn't take your malaria pills. And so we would go behind one of the hooches or something, and the guys knew that I took mine every day and every week. Didn't affect me. So I would, how should I say this kindly?
Donate to the cause.
I would donate to the cause and the bottles for everyone, and then they finally, at some point, would saying, "Hey, there's too many people passing this thing," so they would come back and they'd actually watch you at that point. So, and we had some folks that did get court-martials and demoted. They weren't kicked out of the service, but there were just too many people getting sick at the time, and they couldn't take the pills. They couldn't tolerate them. So I remember that as, somebody passing me their bottle and saying, could you donate here and help me out, because I don't take these things. So
how did you feel about Abby Hoffman, the Yippies, Jerry Rubin?
I really didn't honestly think very much about those particular things. I didn't pay attention to those things personally. The one that probably bothered me the most was, and brings the most amount of fervor out of anybody in my unit that I talked to, and was Miss Fonda. And I don't think there was much comment or talk at that time with most of the guys in the unit. I think some of the officers perhaps had done that. Some educated folks, been through college and maybe had those protests and such.
Because didn't she pose with an anti-aircraft gun?
Exactly.
That would be a little personal.
Very personal. And she, I think to this day, I don't know how she can, but I mean, she rationalizes that she didn't realize that this would, what kind of damage this would do, and I'm sure she didn't. I'm sure she did not, but nonetheless, the effect was to alienate probably more people because of that picture sitting on that anti-aircraft gun than anything. And today, I think even at our last reunion, some of the guys bring that back up about her. It comes up almost every reunion, but I don't know. She was in the news here recently for something, and I can't remember. But if you check your emails or check your Facebook, and we have a site for just Blue Ghost under Facebook, so you can do postings and such. And there are, people still ranting and raving about that, and other than Obamacare and everything else today. But the protests, when I came back the first time, they were going on at Ohio State also. And I got a little fired up. My brother was attending Ohio State. And so I absolutely, and this was probably the crazy part, I got in the car with him and we drove to Columbus, and I was in my uniform. And I was going up there to confront the protesters and perhaps get physical or whatever that may be. I don't know. I don't really remember. I know I was very upset that they were on campus and protesting, and I just wanted to go up there and see if I would be disrespected or I would be spit on again like I was in Seattle.
So were you going in your Class A's?
Class A's. And I went up there specifically, and I got up there, no protesting. The time I got up there, there were a few people, but no mass things like they had been doing and that my brother had described and I'd read about and everything. And I don't know why, I just had this urge that I need to go up and say, because again, you'd just gone through this thing, and just about every time I flew into Seattle or I took off from Seattle, there were protesters at the airport, because that was the main, Fort Lewis, Washington was the main base for people coming in and out of Vietnam and getting out of the service out of Fort Lewis. So when I got there, I remember when I got out of the service in August of '71, after having 27 months in my unit in Vietnam, I got up, and I think we were there about 3 days. Every morning we had to get up and we had to go through the company area and pick up cigarette butts, police the area, as they used to say. And I remember when I got out of the service, and I read the letter just recently, I wrote it to the company commander of Fort Lewis, Washington, that I thought, after having spent all this combat time and doing all this thing with all these guys, that we would be little enough to have to bend over and pick up cigarette butts and everything and police the area. But see, we were still in the military. But at that time, you get a bit of an attitude about, I shouldn't be doing this, and this is, you got to be crazy. I'm out of here. I'm getting out of the service. And so it was hard. But again, Abby Hoffman and everything, of course we knew about that, but I don't think that was as upsetting as actually physically seeing those people at the airport and spitting and screaming at you, and posters. And I mean, you can go back and look at the times and the photos and the news releases of that particular area, because that was the hub of where people flew out and came in. You go from Seattle, and then you flew to home or wherever you went from Seattle.
So what was your attitude towards the war, having served in it? Did you think it was a good cause? Were you just doing your duty? Did you believe in the war?
Well, I think you believe in yourself, and you believe in the guys that you're associated with. Again, back to the camaraderie issue, because you become so close to everybody that is there in that unit, and you know just about everything that's happening in their lives, and who's getting a divorce and who's having trouble with the wife at home, and typically, while the husband is away, folks may play. And that happened probably a lot more than what people would even think that had happened. And so you'd be talking to your friends and your buddies, and then we became so close, and you know, every time somebody was injured, or again, you lose 27 guys in my time I was there, and so we were at a professional level that we weren't quite stateside, but we had some of the best daggone people who could work on helicopters and fly helicopters and put them together as a team. And we were probably one of the most effective units, at least in I Corps, that I could think of. If you look in the records, you know, our company, we had a Presidential Unit Citation. We had 4 Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry citations. When I was there, we had 3 Valorous Unit Awards. We had just a number of very highly decorated professional people who went out and believed every day in what they were doing. I'm not saying they believed in the war, but they absolutely believed in the job and the task that they were supposed to be doing.
You know, I'm sure when you came back, the protesters, you didn't necessarily look at them as protesting the war, maybe as attacking the honor of your unit and
True.
your service.
Well, you take it personally,
Right.
yeah, because you're detached from the part about
The media,
when
all
you're in the war. I don't know that you're really thinking about the war. You are participating and you are attempting to be professional, and again, that being prepared thing says that maybe I have a better chance of surviving. And when you look back and you say, what's the life expectancy of a crew chief or a door gunner or a pilot in Vietnam that did helicopter stuff, and you're looking and saying, you know, you're lucky if you survive 6 months. And I had probably a total of 1,300 or 1,400 hours of combat time, not to include my time as a crew chief when we just did, you put a helicopter back together and then you test flight it. So you usually went on the test flight and had to make adjustments and things like that if you're trying to track rotors and things. So that's the only other time, and then you flew within just a short distance of where you were. But you saw all these people coming in, you saw all the stories they were telling, and you just got excited about it and wanted to be part of it more than just being a mechanic. And so the opportunity I had when I got to go flying, and it really upset my my E7. I'll never forget him. His name was Sergeant Prescott, and he was from Hawaii. And I kept saying, you know, next slot comes open, Sarge, I want to be a crew chief. I want to fly every day. And he says, not going to happen, Fenderbosh, not going to happen. I said, you're too valuable. I need you here doing the maintenance and keeping everybody going and everything. So the minute he went on leave to Hawaii, I think it was Commander Lund, Captain Lund, he assigned me to a helicopter to fly as a crew chief. So I had 4 different helicopters. Again, 2 of them got shot out from underneath me, and the other 2, we had, when I was down in Atlanta and we were touring that facility, they had a Huey there that was about ready to get finished. And its tail number, the last 2, tail number, it was 623. Well, one of the last helicopters I flew on was 624. So it had to be in country the same time I was there and everything else. So pilots and crew people remember the tail numbers of most of the helicopters and things they flew on. And then I did Nighthawk. I flew on Nighthawk. Our unit helped develop that with the cameras and the night scopes, and so we would go out and fly at night. And then I did that for about 3 months, and then I flew Loaches and observation helicopters on my days off if they needed a crew chief. So it was, you're just totally involved in this whole daily thing. And so you're not thinking much about it, except that, as a matter of fact, I don't know that you really think about it at all. You're thinking about your job. You're thinking about how am I going to survive.
What about your post-war period? How did that go? How were you affected by your experience in Vietnam?
Well, when well, I involved myself in going back to school. So when I got out of Vietnam, I went back to Ohio State, and then I came to Rio Grande, and I ended up graduating in 1975. And then I got in the bar business and restaurant business with my brother, and I thought for the first year or so that I was back in Vietnam, because the people who came in the bar wanted to fight and wanted to whatever, and oh, you're the big Vietnam veteran and you're the whatever, and I kind of made a promise that I wouldn't do any harm to anybody if I ever would come in to be confronted or anything else. So I always backed off the confrontation. I always said, no, you know, you're right, you're wrong, I don't really want anything to do with you. And so there was that period where I had been accosted a few times, always hit from behind because I refused to fight. And then, of course, in the culture that we live here in southern Ohio, Gallia County, whatever, you must not be a man or you must not be anything if you don't fight. And so I ended up fighting to protect myself. And there were sleepless nights and everything else. And for the first 2 years, I was literally dreaming about what I was doing in Vietnam. When I put my head on the pillow and I'm flying and I'm doing this mission and I'm doing just total recall of all this stuff that I did for those 27 months, and the insertions and the medevacs, and we medevaced most of our own people. So we didn't wait for the medevac ships to come out. So we would fly right in, pick them up. I'd start doing triage on them, and I had taken extra training and everything else, because a typical helicopter only has a couple little first aid kits on them. So I got a big first aid kit, and I learned how to do IVs and everything else. So we would get those people back, and I think the post part is that I guess I'm still dealing with that today, and that I had gone through counseling, and I still do. There were times that I was going 2 and 3 times a week to help deal with those memories and those kind of things. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know that I look at them as bad memories. I just look at them as that's part of the memory process, and that I had a pretty good memory to begin with, so I'm pretty good on detail. And when I get together with all these guys, and you sit there and talk at your reunions, and people say, well, you remember when you did this? And some people just sit there and go, well, no, I don't remember any of that stuff. Lord, that's 40 years ago. I don't remember any of that. I happen to remember that, and I've got pictures, and I took tons of pictures, hundreds of pictures. I always carried a camera with me. So for me, that's the memory part, is that the pictures associated with what we did that day or we didn't do that day, and so it's just interesting to hear other people talk about it. But my thing was work. So my avoidance factor to think about it was that I got so involved in working 100-hour weeks I worked at McDonald's Corporation for 8 or 9 years, working the bar and the restaurant. could be 120, 130-hour weeks. Getting married in 1979 and been married to my lovely wife since. But the part that we have about reunions and stuff here is that we have friends and things that won't come because they don't want to relive that many things. And say, no, come on, guys, it's not like that. We don't even have to talk about that. I just want to see you. And this last reunion in Dayton, I had the choice of going to my nephew's wedding or going to see 3 guys that I had not seen in 41 years. So I called him and told him, and actually saw him on a short visit, and told him that I wouldn't be able to come to his wedding, that I had to see these guys. And it was kind of an unbelievable moment. And those things are what make it palatable for me to go on. At 65 years old, I still think about this stuff. Not all the time, but every time I see Afghan and Iraqi war veterans and all those other things, and the combat situations, and they talk about IEDs and people being blown up and everything, you relive all that stuff in a different time. And so it's never going to go away. It has impacted me negatively and positively. I've been able to help veterans. I'm on the Veteran Service Commission here in Gallia County, have been for 7 years. I do things at the VFW. Just the ability to help a guy get through situations that, whether it's World War II, Korea, Vietnam, or whatever, but right now the big influx of people into the VA system are Vietnam, and now just starting in the last year or two are Afghani and Iraqi vets, which are doing the same things, the same PTSD issues, the same terrible sights that you see with people being blown apart and your friends being killed, and I don't know that it ever leaves you. And so I still go to counseling, like I said, and that part of the recovery for me is that not only do I determine why the heck did I stay 27 months, and there's a lot of guys that did 2 and 3 tours, and they would probably be saying the same thing in regards to, why did you do that? Well, I was there for my friends, I was there for my buddies, I was there for the company, I was there for the part that I felt a part of something. I felt a part of the unit, that unit cohesiveness, and it is strong.
It doesn't make sense to anybody but the people that we're in, really, that idea.
I think so. I think so. I think if you're talking to guys and people, I think they do understand. I mean, there is a basic understanding of the terribleness and things that happen in war and situations. If they didn't understand it, they'd be blind to that. And I just think that it's a very important part that we don't forget these guys and the veterans that need the help and need the assistance, because they are truly dealing with it every day, as I do, and maybe in a different way. And again, my coping mechanism has always been just involve yourself, work, and this thing will go away. And probably 2007 or so, I kind of had a relapse. And then I've had another relapse since I retired 2 years ago. Because now you don't have work, you don't have the support mechanism that you have by going to work every day and just being with people. And now I get up and I'm home, and I kind of a little lost. So I'm working on that. But that's the same thing that happens with any retiree. But if you're a military person and been a combat person, or not even necessarily that, we have other veterans that are suffering from PTSD and other issues non-related to combat. If I had stayed in that hangar and just worked on helicopters all the time and did not get out to fly, I probably would have come home after my first year if I had just stayed there and done the but every day you look over and you look at Graves registration and you see those bodies flying in. You don't have to be in combat for that not to have affected you. Not to see the guys that work in that building and put those tags on someone's foot and send them home to their parents. That they talk to you about that experience and they're devastated. Those guys, I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it. And so it impacts you. And you say, well, how could you suffer from PTSD? I mean, you weren't even in combat. You don't have to be. You do not have to be. I mean, you can have the trauma for women of being raped in the service, and that's PTSD. Any traumatic thing, a car accident, you know, that you lose your leg or you lose an eye or you lose something, you can suffer from all that. So.
Any other experiences you want to share with us?
No, I don't think so, no.
We thank you very much for your time and appreciate you taking the opportunity to talk with us.
You're welcome.